Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We've got a great friend of the show, Zed Jelani, on. There's some new developments with regards to the 1619 project. He's going to break those down. We also have Ken Klippenstein on, of course, national security reporter for The Nation. There are new details coming out about exactly how a law enforcement killing of an Antifa activist went down on the West Coast. He's going to break all that down for us. But we wanted to start with the state of stimulus negotiations.
That's right. So the state is bad. Let's just leave it at that. 15 days to go until the election. It continues to be very not good. So let's throw up the first Washington Post thing that we've got there on the screen. Pelosi is setting a Tuesday deadline for reaching stimulus deal with the White House ahead of the election. We'll play that for you in just a second. But you can see when you pair it up with this next piece of news, not great. So Mitch McConnell has decided to schedule a vote on the $500 billion COVID-19 bill, which is set for Wednesday. So that's what we have currently. That, of course, falls within the 48-hour deadline. But it's not like there have been any realistic progress in terms of these stimulus negotiations. Secretary Mnuchin and Nancy Pelosi have spoken on a couple of different occasions. But by and large, Pelosi seems to just be moving this thing and setting deadlines and moving things into place where she just does not want to have a vote ahead of the election. And you could see this pretty clearly when she laid this out on ABC's This Week. Let's take a listen.
48 only relates to if we want to get it done before the election, which we do.
Well, don't you? Yeah.
Yeah, so which we do. But we're saying to them, we have to freeze the design on some of these things. Are we going with it or not? And what is the language? I'm optimistic.
So, Krystal, I mean, you can see she's by and large just not interested in doing a deal. Setting a 48-hour deadline. I mean, there's no rule, by the way, that there has to be a 48-hour deadline. You know, Congress does work for the other 13 days ahead of the election. She's just like, no, that's it. You know, after this, it's over.
Well, the whole time it has been an exercise in moving the goalposts, right? It's like, oh, these are the things we need, and then once you get those, and oh, no, actually, that's not good enough. It kind of came down to this idea that they need to embrace this very specific language of the House's contact tracing regime. And so now that the White House is basically like, okay, you can have that too.
They're like, sure.
Now she's quibbling over the very specific language involved in that contact tracing. Let's take a listen to that.
With all due respect to some of the people in the president's administration, they're not legislators. So when they said we're accepting the language on testing, for example, they were just making a light touch. They said they changed shall to may, requirements to recommendations, a plan to a strategy, not a strategic plan. They took out 55% of the language that we had there for testing and tracing. And the tracing part is so important because communities of color have been disproportionately affected by this. So on this subject where we have agreement, we don't have agreement in the language yet, but I'm hopeful. And here's the big difference. Communities of color have more deaths than the white population. Let's just think of this. If you were a child, a Hispanic child has 8 times more chance of going to the hospital with COVID than a white child. A black child, 5 times more chance of going to the hospital than that. That's because we have not addressed the problem, the testing, the tracing, the treatment, the mask wearing, the separation, the sanitation, and all that goes with it.
And you know what? Communities of color have been disproportionately affected, not only with the disease, but also with job loss, which is exactly why you should be doing everything you can to get them some help in the last remaining days when such a thing is possible. I mean, look, already I think we're both very skeptical that even if Pelosi said yes to the deal that's on the table from Steve Mnuchin, who, by the way, is traveling in the Middle East right now, which doesn't bode well for being able to seal the deal on these negotiations. Not that we were that hopeful anyway. But even if Pelosi said yes, I think we're both fairly skeptical that the Senate Republicans would even go along with it. Because at this point, and we're going to cover this later on the show, some of them are even starting to distance themselves from Trump. He doesn't quite have the same hold and lock on them that maybe he once did as they look at the polling. They see the way that this thing is going off a cliff. They've always had this deep ideological opposition to spending money to help you. They have no problem when it comes to helping, like, you know, beef up the defense budget or spend money on corporate tax cuts for their donors. That they have no issue with. This type of spending they always have a problem with. And the donor class doesn't want them to go along with it oftentimes as well. So even if Pelosi was to say yes now, it's very unlikely that the Senate Republicans would go along with it. But at this moment, right at this moment, she is the obstacle of barring any path forward.
Well, that's the part I just don't really get on the politics of all of this, which is that make the Republicans vote it down. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Put on display Trump's general... Look, I mean, Trump has been saying, and we'll play for you in a second, where he's like, I want a bigger stimulus bill. Like, I think the Republicans will go along with it. There's no evidence that that is true.
No.
And there's actually been very little evidence throughout his entire presidency that he's been able to whip votes for anything that he actually wants, except on a very few different occasions. I mean, if you look, the GOP freaked out whenever he tried to get the border wall funding through the Defense Act or through the DOD budget. I mean, they freaked out whenever China tariffs. They've tried to rebuke him on so many different things. It's not like they believe in much of his policy, as I'll cover in my radar. So let Trump and the GOP hash it out, right? In the public, days before the election, probably couldn't think of something better. What it shows to me, she won't even take the risk. Because look at the way Trump is talking. This guy, he is desperate for something. Let's take a listen to that.
I think Nancy Pelosi maybe is coming along. We'll find out. We want to do it. I want to do it at a bigger number than she wants. That doesn't mean all the Republicans agree with me, but I think they will in the end. If she would go along, I think they would too on stimulus. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, see, I mean, he's absolutely desperate. He's like, I want something bigger than what she wants. I mean, that's not, at least not true yet.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's never put anything bigger than what she wants on the table.
He might want something bigger in terms of the offer that hasn't yet happened. But look, in terms of the Senate floor, the GOP Senate, and there's zero evidence that any of these people are going to go along with it. She refuses to just kick it over to them. And I think because she doesn't even want the appearance that something might happen. She can't even deliver in the 5 to 10% chance that this might actually pass. That is too much of a win for Trump in her book. And look, that means that a lot of people are going to lose. I just think we can't lose sight of the fact that for the next 4 months, it is extraordinarily likely we will not have a stimulus package. I think there's no words for what the human toll of that is going to be.
Yeah.
I just think it's insane.
It is insane. And if you dig into the details, one of the indications we have that the Senate Republicans, even if Pelosi said yes to this, would not take up this deal, would ultimately go along with it, is the fact that McConnell is putting this other $500 billion deal on the floor this week. Guess what's included in it? You guys are going to get this. The corporate liability shield. So no checks for you, but in the Senate Republican plan, they will make sure that corporations are protected from any potential liability because, they've got their priorities. That one obviously is not going anywhere either. This is very similar to something that they've already pushed, that the House Democrats have already shot down. So at this point, we're back to just basically a messaging war. Pelosi's trying to convince Americans that there are good reasons for her to stand in the way of this deal. Senate Republicans are trying to posture like they really are trying to do something when they're actually really not. The White House is trying to say, we actually want to go even bigger than the House Democrats. So at this point, this all just boils down to political messaging and trying to cover their own butts rather than get you the help that you need. And as always, we want to focus on what the ramifications are. What is the fallout from this? We have new data from the Census Bureau that shows just how many Americans are worried, somewhat worried that they are likely to face eviction in the next 2 months. So 32% of people nationwide, a third of Americans worried about facing eviction. That number jumps. We can throw more of the detail up on the screen. That number jumps to almost 50% in states like Wyoming, North Carolina, Nevada. So some of the hardest hit states. I mean, you think about a state like Nevada, the service industry is everything there. Some of these giant casinos are either shut down completely or only operating on the weekends. I mean, that is like central, the beating heart of their economy. And so you have so many millions of Americans facing this landscape as we head into the winter. The eviction moratorium that was passed through the executive order that the Trump administration said that they were going forward with has already been watered down. We looked last week, we saw the new jobless claims ticking back up. Clearly the recovery has stalled out and Washington's not doing a darn thing about it.
They absolutely aren't, and it doesn't look like anything more is going to happen. 15 days to go until the election. Pretty unbelievable.
All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radar, so that's next.